Hey everybody, this is Chris Sheng and welcome to another episode. Today we've got Hannah Ajikawo, who is CEO and founder of Revenue Funnel, a go-to-market and growth specialist. Been doing this for quite a few years now, so thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, of course. Tell us a little bit about Revenue Funnel. What is it that you're working on right now? What are the kind of companies or individuals you work with?
Sure. Yeah, so Revenue Funnel is a relatively new organization. Gone through a few different phases in the last year and a half alone. So I started Revenue Funnel actually on International Women's Day in 2023. And the objective was to help simplify go-to-market strategy for high growth startups. And that soon shifted to more in the scale up realm. So today, what we do is we work with B2B service and tech organizations who are about 30 million in revenue and above, basically helping them to really quickly identify and reverse some of the hidden blockers that often exist inside their go-to-market engine. So when they're thinking about growth, that's a default. Everybody wants to grow. One of the hardest part is to figure out how do we do that in a simple way, particularly at a time when you don't have as much as you used to have. So I always say that one of my personal superpowers is being resourceful. So really helping to roll that kind of mindset and culture into go-to-market teams where they can find better ways to utilize some of the stuff they have. So yeah, absolutely love it. But yeah, career salesperson, always been in sales. That's all I've done. I don't know anything else. I just like solving problems, and sales seem to be a nice way to do that, where you get paid more than if you were, I don't know, maybe working for a public service organization, which is my initial direction. And I think I just got an accidental interest in go to market. I didn't know it was called that. Strategy, didn't
Mm-hmm.
know it was called that, just from being in different sales environments. So lots of different companies, very big publicly traded companies. They operate differently to
Yeah,
uh, all scrappy startups. So yeah, I just
yeah,
some of the patterns there and decided to go out my own. So yeah.
got it. Are there specific like size and stage of companies that you tend to work with? Or is it pretty, across the board?
Yeah, I think so initially I actually got pulled into stuff because people would look at my background and I'd have like these, it was crazy. I'd have like these multi-millionaire founders who
Uh-huh.
have done it many times find me somehow and say, you've got really unique experience. Can you help us? And I think that helps me figure out, oh, actually, I think I know some stuff that I didn't realize was so valuable. So I started out there about 5 years ago, but today it's focused more on companies that are in the sort of 30 to 50 million in ARR.
Mm,
They are really like, we've got some big investment now. We're growing okay, or maybe we've got some like sophistication to do in our go to
yeah.
market. We're not doing all the best practice. So that's the sweet spot. That's where I know if I can see that from a mile away and I'm like, yeah, we can add value. But there's going to be companies where we're like, you kind of got this, and we can't
Yeah.
we I don't personally believe that this is going to be we're going to be the best fit. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, as I'm a go-to-market geek too. I've been doing this for like 10 years and I've come to the grips that what I'm really good at, my sweet spot is like helping companies go from 0 to 1. Like they're from like ideation or first handful of customers to like getting to their first few million in AR, right? And it's such a when I've talked to other more like go-to-market specialists and more like the later stage companies, like more mature. Some specialize from the 10 to 100. Some like are working from larger enterprises like 100 and larger. It's a
Yeah.
different framework. It's a different mentality. It's a different set of resources. You're mentioning, you specialize on the 30 to 50 side where they do have some substantial funding. They're not probably necessarily worrying about payroll and they can spend a little bit more budgetary discretion on larger tech stacks and things that's really going to help move the needle. Um,
Yeah.
but curious as to like what is that frame like how what does that framework look like for you when because I think about like my process in terms of you're doing like a scan and an audit of like where are the gaps, and I usually have like an exercise that companies will have to go through. Do you have anything like that in terms of like how you identify like what are some of the things that are going to take immediate priority?
Yeah. So this is where I am. One of one of my friends called me the CRO whisperer.
Yeah.
I feel like I work. If I can see an organization's got a CRO or a growth leader,
Mm,
I already know for me that they're on the right track. Now,
yeah.
the next challenge for that leader is to figure out, I've got this remit to grow this company. Yeah, I've got some money, but how do I use it? So when the whole point of me shaping revenue funnel is I identified that a lot of companies, when they're working with consultants or when they're building out go to market, they are very, very heavily focused on these sales and vendor-led
Yeah.
things that are required for them to be successful. They very rarely have a very intentional focus on the buyer and what they need and their desires. So revenue funnel is built around a very holistic view of revenue. It's not like, oh, we need to make some net new sales. It's like, what is revenue? Where is it? Where can we find it? Where do we need to retain it? Where can we grow it? And it's looking in really granular detail at every area around the revenue funnel to identify where do we prioritize. The friction comes with a lot of companies that I even engage with, where it's a bit like, we know how we want to solve this. We want to do this very specific thing. I'm like, do you want to do this very specific thing, or do you want to grow? Like,
Mm.
what is the what? And it's like, well, we think this is going to contribute to it. So there's an internal assessment that people have to think through. It's just like, is it a speed thing? Is it a cash flow
Mm.
thing? Is it an expansion thing? Is it a brand game? Is it a market penetration? And I don't think people look at all of those things when they're thinking about growth and go to market. It's just like, well, I know that I need to hire a ton of people, get the new tech in, fix all these things. Yeah, that's true. But over the next year to probably 3 years, we have to be a bit more precise in what we're doing. So that's kind of like the frameworks that I use, very just like sales, right? We're going to try and figure out what's going
Yeah.
on, prioritize something, and then we're going to take action. It's pretty much the same, but it's just in a way that is looking more at the buyer. So the psychology of buying, the convenience of buying, and how that can work to support an easier transition from like initial conversation to revenue in your bank. So
Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, I feel like that's kind of those are kind of like the stages. It's like 0 to 1 is like focus heavily on just like any means possible acquire sales, right? And then it's like you kind of get to the first few million, and then that first few million to maybe to like that 20 to 30, 40 million is going to be more so around like process, customer retention, customer expansion, really understanding the buyer journey. How we make it more frictionless for them? Funneling up that iterative feedback loop to then back to the sales and marketing side of things, and then having that cycle continuously evolve so you can go more upstream, right? And then like the larger organizations, like the true enterprise, are then talking about more strategically around like how do we do acquisition strategies, like how do we do, how do we like spend more money on optimization and streamlining different processes to improve margins, and you're trying to grow from different like avenues at different stages based on maturity. How did you
yeah.
find that this, I know you kind of mentioned you fell into it, but like, how did you find like this, that, like that, your sweet spot in terms of like the kinds of companies, and that you had this knowledge base that was actually better fitting for that versus maybe something more earlier or more mature?
No, that's a good question. So firstly, one thing I found, so I've worked in four-man bands, right? Where in
Yeah.
startups, I always say like my first AI startup was in 2011. Like I was there, we didn't even know what the hell we were doing. We're like, what the hell is AI? We had to go to Kiev with developers to get trained on AI and ML and see all the engineers in their offices trying to figure out. But technology wasn't as strong and powerful as it is today, right? So the things that there was a lot of manual AI happening back then. So even just coming in to consult for companies like that, what I was finding is I'm a very big thinker, so I'm quite visionary in my thinking. And what would happen, even I had this in sales as well, like I would tend to navigate towards bigger deals, right? So we'd have like an
Mm,
average contract value in our team of like 6.5 grand. And I'd be like, I just closed a 65K deal. They're like, how did you do that? Like, we sell like 5K run rate business information subscriptions. I'm like, well, I positioned it differently. So I'm a big thinker.
yeah.
And I just leaned into that. So what I was finding with the smaller companies is I'm looking at this really big picture, but they're looking at their bank account like we're trying to get through the next 3 months. We get that, but like we need to do these really scrappy things. And also sometimes, and again, some of the clients I've worked with in the earlier days, it's some of the founders are so kind of like, I just see this and I want to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like they want to work with an external person to get permission to do the thing that they want to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
rather than help. So I was like, this is great, but it's not for me. Whereas when you have these larger organizations, like these really, I mean, multi-billion-dollar ones that I've worked with as well, they are like, we are so in the minutia, we can't even see some stuff. So you're bringing this unbiased, impartial view where they're like, tell me what you know. what can you see? And for some things, it's like complete enlightenment. For other things, it's like we thought that might be the case. So what do? We've got these 20 ideas, but can we work with you to, they really ask a lot of questions. They're looking for your help and expertise. And I'm talking about PwC consultants that have transitioned into corporate, Accenture consultants. They're like, yeah, we're in the detail now. It's hard. It's hard for us to put on our consulting hat. So I love that. It's fulfilling as well. And again, it's just you learn fast because you're working with so many people inside across an organization. So yeah, I love that. Actually, it's a good question.
Interesting. Very cool. And I guess like also now, within these larger organizations, there's more people that's part of execution, and execution is so critical in terms of like getting whatever the hierarchy strategy or vision is to yield the success or outcomes that you're trying to measure against, right? And so that to me, as I see, the more larger organizations, the more people you have to deal with, it starts becoming more like a communication thing too. Like communication is so critical in terms of like being able to get buy-in from all the different players that are involved in making the execution of that idea work. How do you think about communication and like the idea of buying in? Because bringing in a third party it can be met in a lot of different ways based on personality types, right? And so like, what are some of those? Maybe you have specific like use cases around overcoming some of those challenges, and how have you developed that interpersonal communication skill for you to personally like level up, or was that something that was inherent to you as part of the job?
Yeah, no, this is communication will make or break anything. Like particularly these things, like I can't. I mean, it's and what's a shame is what I see is that. So I'll just give some reflection and then kind of give some ideas and guidance. So just in reflection, I've worked with when it comes to consulting directly with a founder, right, for months and months. I've also worked with teams where it's like we are working cross-functionally from communications, marketing, go-to-market, enablement, CS, CRO, CMO, the reps, the CRO, that like a revenue operation. Like there's so many different departments, and what I see where things go wrong when it comes to communication is, one, you mentioned it, it's that initial buy-in, but it's also this siloed, often ego-driven approach to engaging a vendor, where you'll have a team that says, I'm just going to bring in a consulting because I've got the budget. They won't tell the team that's downstream impacted. And then all of a sudden you might have like reps who like maybe account executives that are like, what's all this? Why is my BDR saying this now? Where's this messaging come from? So, oh, by the way, we just got this consultant in to kind of change the whole thing. So there's a lot of ego involved. Like it's rife. There's a lot of ego involved in that. And then the buy-in means that people are out to try and prove people wrong rather than say, hey, I need you on board for this, and this is why, and we really articulate it. I've also seen where there is incredible communication, over communication, repetition from the actual business that we're engaging with, and they are having literally weekly catch-ups, bringing in SVPs and AVPs and reps and at every level, and feeding back results, feeding back progress, feeding back needs, positioning it as to why it's important, why it's okay to get the reps out of the field. And a lot of time people just overlook that. They're just like, oh, it's fine, we're just going to kind of do what we're doing and deliver it. Now, when I come into those scenarios, because I've seen it go wrong, the first thing people always ask before they sign a contract is, where does it go wrong? And you tell them communication, and then within 1 week you see the communication break down. It's like, I literally told you that this is the one thing that will break it. So what I do is I'm very head on. So I establish almost like an upfront contract, right? So going into a sandal mode, but I will say, this is how we structure communication, but tell me how you would like to be communicated with. So the success of this project is going to mean that, one, you respond inside certain timeframes, because if we're trying to move the needle when you've got this tight deadline, we can only do that by holding you accountable to that. The next thing, we have to be okay to put egos aside and have difficult conversations. That means sometimes you're going to tell me that it's not in line with what you expected, and sometimes I'm going to tell you this is just how it has to be done, and trust me. And we have to be okay with that. And the other thing is, like, this is our communication channels. Maybe we're using a project management tool or email or this. And it's like, and this is the guidance that we're going to give you to engage with your team. So things that I do to kind of like help that whole process, I'll create video content. I'll create like slimlined versions of the statement of work to share with the wider organization. So you don't need like 50 people on a kickoff call, right? But if I send a video that's 5 minutes that is detailing the whole engagement, why we're here, what we're doing, my background, how to contact me if you have questions, inviting people to participate should they want to consult on the engagement, who's the head of the project, why that, like just all these details, it helps people feel like they're involved and there's not this like silent project happening. So I like to over communicate, but it's still not perfect. You still have people who, we're humans, we ignore emails, we're busy, it's Friday, it's if I respond to this email, it creates work for me as a project lead. So it's there's a lot of that, but I just feel like and I talk about this a lot on LinkedIn, we just have to cut through the BS, man. Like I can't deal with the where people are like, just make it look good, or it's just like, if something's bad, it's bad, let's get it done, let's know what the status quo is and let's improve it. But what you find is a lot of that people don't want to be, they want to protect their image internally. And it's like, well, you've got a consultant in, which means something's not quite right, or you don't know something, or you need information faster. So just accept that. So yeah, there's just a lot of ideas around it, but there's no perfect way. But the biggest thing is you have to over communicate. You have to.
Yeah. Interesting. So yesterday I interviewed former CMO of ZoomInfo, is now currently the CMO of SentinelOne, which is like a cybersecurity company.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because like he shared with me an exercise that he does that he just did with SentinelOne. But I'm curious if you implement some of this and probably in like the buyer discovery, which is he went into SentinelOne and the first thing that he did was survey all the people that's on his team and understand who the different stakeholders are within the organization as it relates to his KPIs and how he's going to be measured, right? And so he asks, everybody universally, few questions, basic ones are like, what's working, what's not working, stuff like that. And then he compiles that data set and then sits everybody down together and be like, from what I've heard, this is what's working and not working. And then that's how he's kind of like using that as a way to lean into like how he's going to then get certain things accomplished by understanding what everybody has said from the get-go. And that's helped him in terms of like when I brought up that question, like buy-in, right? Because now it's actually you're referencing the voice of that community of the people that you're trying to get the buy-in from. Similarly, I'm curious as to like, maybe it's like, that's not the exercise you need to do within the internal organization in your case, but like you talked about the buyer journey, understanding that. Is that something that you're doing? Because to me, it's like it's always more difficult to argue against data, right? It's like you can have a disagreement, but if it's like, okay, look, I don't know, maybe let's remove the ego, let's go, because to me, the market's the absolute truth, or whoever the end users, that's the absolute truth. Let's go ask and let's go figure out the right questions to ask to let that data dictate which direction we should actually be doing. How much of that is played into how you think about like your role and what you're doing and the value that you can bring in terms of like collecting that data, if that's part of the process, and then how do you go about it?
Yeah, so we do online and offline what we'd call like go-to-market assessment, right? So it would be a case of going through various different materials, but also we do online surveys. So there's like it's horrible, and I tell them it's horrible because it's like 200-point question, and the first thing, so there's two parts to it. There's the actual data, there's the attitude towards the survey and the assessments, and there's the assumptions that people have about it. So I'll break that down. One is the attitude. It's very interesting to see how when you are doing a cross-functional survey, how much people do not know about the people that are supposed to support them in being successful. So it's so interesting when you're asking a sales leader about marketing activities. They're like, oh, I don't know that. I'm not in marketing. It's like, you should. And this is the thing, right? So, it makes customers really uncomfortable. But I'm like, that's why you work with revenue funnel. If you want to work with a different consultant, that's okay. I'm here to make you really uncomfortable and shake you out of this status quo, because you are a big beast. And if you keep doing what you're doing, it's not going to always work. And that's why I'm here to ruffle that. So it's like you can't be in a cross-functional team where you don't realize the activities that
Mm,
happen, right, downstream or upstream. The other thing is like the data. So then you've got people completing it, but then saying, oh, we do it this way. Oh, I know that. And I'm like, but all of your answers are different. Every single answer from every single member is different. You said you monitor your business on these KPIs. They said they do it on these ones. It's a good thing that we now know that, because we can now fix it. And then the other thing is just the attitude towards or kind of like the assumptions around how things could work, and then only recognizing, oh wow, we are really discordant in how we're working together. So yeah, we do a lot of that, but we also look at like other conversations, so like different like sentiment and things we're hearing, and different, of course there's lots of external research. We just try to pull it in, and everyone tries to prove their point. In research you have to use a lot of external research.
yeah,
If you do lead generation, you're going to say lead generation, you're going to make sure the data talks to that. So we just try to bring it all together to say, well, this is kind of how people operate now, this is where you should be, and there's a big gap between here. And we haven't really had much interaction with like end users, like their clients. I
mm-hmm.
got there. I think that's usually what people assume for like big consulting firms. They'll spend time there. I've seen the reports of some of those that work. It's not always great.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's a lot of data and stuff that happens in that point, but you need to do that, because you need to have a state, you need to have a level zero, like where we're starting from. But people
yeah,
hate that part. I find it exciting. I'm like, give me a survey, let me go, let's let's figure this out. But yeah, people don't like it.
yeah, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is shaking things up because then it's like making people uncomfortable because things are going to change, or like it's identifying opportunities for change, I suppose. And it's like not even about the change itself, but people are somewhat fearful of that because then they get probably like insecure about job security and things like that. So
Yeah.
makes sense.
But, but a lot of it's around like even before the communication thing, and we'll talk about that, how projects can break down. Before that,
Yeah,
it's about your consultant readiness. People
yeah,
will say, let's go, let's do this. And then the first time that you asked for a meeting, it's like, oh, we can't meet, we got a team meeting there, and we got
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
How how ready were you for this? Right. And I
yeah,
try to send out pre-work for people, and I say, go through this assessment, go through this little exercise. It's on our website, which basically helps you assess like, do I need a consultant or not? And if I do, what do I need them for? So you've just got like a nice little structure to go back to the business and say, oh, we actually have made an informed decision about working with a consultant. It's not just we've got a bit of money, let's spend money on a consultant. But again, people buy really poorly, like
yeah,
really poorly, which is unfortunate, because then it becomes you're trying to overcome some of those challenges. So consulting, there's some dark sides. It's not always rosy.
yeah. I feel it's a lot like personal trainer, right? It's like sometimes people just hire the personal trainer for the sake of I went halfway and they think it's like I went all the way. I hired this person and
Yeah.
that's going to be my solution, right? And then when the personal trainer's like, you got to be here now 5 a.m., it's all of a sudden like the excuses
Whoa.
come in. It's like, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is like too fast, too fast. But yeah, I think like that's so interesting. It's like there's a psychology. This is all about like that psychology of like human behavior too, which I think like maybe a lot of like go to market people are intrinsically curious about, because same with like the CMO yesterday is like very curious about neuroscience and like why people
Yeah.
do the things that they do, right? It's really diving into that, and then like how do you help people unblock themselves from whatever that might be, whether it's from marketing or sales or growth, and that all stems back, whether it's professional or personal growth. Like these are things that we all deal with individually in different ways, and based on our own experiences in those facets, like we present ourselves in with different challenges and how we overcome certain things,
Yeah.
which is so interesting to me. But that being
It is.
said, yeah,
And I was going to say, you have to be a coach and an unpaid therapist. That those are the things that are going to help you to create the person level change and that internal change, so that they feel sometimes big, brave, and bold enough to go and
yeah,
help in an organization. Otherwise, you're working with someone who's just like, I'm struggling, I'm stressed out, and you're like, yeah, we have to get out of that headspace.
yeah, you have to help empower them to feel like they can do it themselves, right? Like, or help walk them through to that next step. Um, Interesting. I want to kind of at least, cover this part, which is as we're running up on time, is just in terms of like just the go-to-market with the specific segment that you focus on, has there been any like noticeable evolutions, or changes in the cycle of like the buying behaviors, and how you look at revenue, right? Like, is there more of a focus of retention and expansion versus like net new? Like, where are you seeing some of those changes in the past like year to today? And like, where is the focus or priority shift as you've been involved in this space?
Yeah, if I put everybody knows that they should be focusing on trying to retain as much revenue as possible. Like they know that, but they don't. It's so out of sync, right? So most of your revenue is
Mm,
here. You've got these CSMs predominantly looking after that existing revenue, who are often, not all the time, but often not incentivized in the right way to
yeah.
help drive additional opportunity into those accounts. And I always say value. I always say existing customers would happily spend all of their money with one vendor if you can show them how to do that. And we don't do that very well. And then on the flip side, but what you actually see is everyone's after net new. And we need to, because we need to grow. We need to grow. We need organic growth sometimes for acquisition, whatever. But we need growth. We need top line growth. So I completely understand, but it's just disproportionate to where the revenue is really, where the biggest opportunity is, particularly now with companies that are like, we've just created 5 new products. Let's go out to the new market and try and sell it. Go to your existing customers. I promise you, they'll pick it up more. So I think there's still a pattern there. When it comes to buying behaviors, still with people making big purchases, what I'm seeing is less loyalty because there's so much choice. I mean, there is so much choice, too much product parity, which means that you have to differentiate through service, through execution, through delivery, through your sales engagement. And companies are still not understanding that. Like the experience you create, we've been saying it for
Yeah.
like, I mean, Challenger said it about 13 years ago. Hey guys, forget price, it's the experience. Yet people are still focused on, we just kind of get in front of anyone, and when they and just give them pricing or send them a cheeky email. It's like, it's not that anymore. People are legitimately trying to say, hey, so you're like, I'm stuck and I'm scared to make decisions in my business right now because if I
Mm-hmm.
get it wrong, I'm going to get it
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And I love what SBI Growth have been talking about, the concept of reset buying. It's funny because I mentioned this in the keynote I did last year. I didn't have a term for it, but essentially, McKinsey's been doing a lot of research around like the top 10 priorities for CEOs in big companies. And one thing they identified last year was because people are operating with, of course, they're trying to do more with less. It also means that with the headcount decline, people have more responsibilities.
Yeah.
So what you're finding inside that buying journey is, Chris is responsible for something. He thinks he is. And I'm coming and say, hey, Chris, I help companies to unblock their go-to-market and do these things. You're like, Hannah, this sounds fantastic, but I don't even know if that's my responsibility anymore. I need to understand how that decision making works. So you've got this reset buying where needs consistently change, the buying journey consistently changes, because there's so much change in the organization, and that's
Yeah.
people are not paying enough attention to that. To say, so when you're like, I want to use my med pick and I've got my economic buyer for today, like you
Mm-hmm.
have to continue to do discovery, over and over again, always on. You have to keep challenging them. Last week when we spoke, the first part of the meeting, she said, you told me this, we learned this. Is this still the same? Has anything changed? Okay, let's continue. But we're just hoping and praying that things haven't changed. And if I've got that information and it's on the system, I tick it, I'm not going to go back over it. That's the bit, like, there's just too much up in the air right now. And I think like we're not building our processes to support buyers who are like, yeah, I'm a little bit scared. I don't know what's
Mm,
going on.
yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like that's somewhat the consensus, especially with the larger organizations too.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your insights and spending the time with us in your Friday afternoon, going into the evening. Super awesome, super insightful, and it was just for me, it was a lot of fun to just kind of hear your thoughts.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I mean, if anyone wants to get in touch, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there. And I'm writing some articles about the future of sales around symbiotic sales. So check that out as well. It's pretty interesting.
Awesome, will do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.